Go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce Carl Blick and Garen from UT Austin, and turn the rest of the whole over to them.
Thank you very much. I'm Carl, this is Garen, and as she said, we're from UT Austin, but perhaps more importantly, we're from COERLL, which stands for the Center for Open Educational Resources and Language Learning. It's a mouthful. Okay, and he's going to drive for me because I can't drive and talk at the same time, so go ahead. So real quickly, I'm going to introduce what we do at COERLL, what COERLL is, and then move into our discussion of open textbooks. We're going to talk about two open textbooks today, mainly Français interactif, and then the German version of Blick. Okay, and then Garen is going to will talk to you more about some of our newer products that we think are more 4R enabled, and give you some usage stats and talk to you about where we think all of this is headed. So it turns out that it's important when you start a new center that you have an acronym that's pronounceable. And I thought ours was, although OER doesn't get pronounced, we just say OER. And I had in my head that it was COERLL, right? The Center for Open Educational Resources and Language Learning was COERLL. Turns out people pronounce it COERLL or COERLL, or they even said I named it after myself. Carl, COERLL. And we're in Texas, so COERLL. I swear I've heard all of these. So we don't care how you pronounce it. But usually when I'm talking to people, I'm talking to foreign language instructors who don't know what OER stands for. So in this crowd, what makes us a little bit different there are the two L's, because we're going to talk about something that's fairly discipline-specific, language learning. COERLL is the newest of 50 national foreign language resource centers. We're from the East Coast to Hawaii, and we are a congressional grant, Title VI grant. There are NRCs, National Resource Centers, LRCs, Language Resource Centers, CYBERS, Centers for International Business Education, and so forth. All of this falls under the International Education wing of the Department of Education. So we're not really UT, we're located at UT. We were formerly the Texas Language Technology Center out of the College of Liberal Arts. And our focus is on OER, for language learning. So as an LRC, we've been given a mandate by the government our mission is to improve foreign language capacity in the United States. So our focus is on language learners and teachers K through 16. With a particular focus, I should mention, on what's called less commonly taught languages. So things like Yoruba. How many of you speak Yoruba? And we do all of this through the lens of OER, or open education, which makes us different than all the other 300 or so centers under this grant, because they all do international education. We're the only one that focuses then our efforts through open education. So I want to talk about the notion of degree of openness with materials, because where I'm going to start today is with materials that started actually a decade ago, and they're not really, I didn't know, I wasn't at the time, I didn't know, I never heard of OER. So I'm calling these mainstreamed OER. They look a lot like traditional materials, but they do carry a CC, an open license. They're not entirely, I would say, 4R enabled, but we can maybe have that discussion. So I'll pass these around too. These are actually our print on demand. All of the content is available online for free. Those are about $30. We work through a company called lulu.com. And it's actually worked out nicely for us. We have a revenue stream of about $13,000 just on Français interactif alone last year. So where this story starts with my problem as a French professor with the adoption model of commercial publishing, which I believe turns out instructor-friendly materials, not student-friendly materials. And by that, publishing companies spend a lot of money on marketing research and on focus group analysis of professors, because they're the ones who adopt the textbooks, not the large mass of end users that we call students. So there was no real formative evaluation, and I know because I've published books with commercial publishers, Pearson and McGraw-Hill's, two of the biggest. No real usability studies for students, and that really upset me. And I also found that there was a break in a sense, there was a break on, the adoption model acts as a break on innovation, because my background is in linguistics and second language acquisition. And I found that while the technology was interesting and nice and up to date, the pedagogy was basically behaviorism circa 1955. Okay, so we, when I say we, at the time, about 2000, it was, next slide. A group of graduate students and faculty, about 35 members of our authoring team got together. And our manifesto really had these points. We wanted to deconstruct the native speaker model, because native speakers are all, if you open up a French textbook or a German textbook, who do you see? Pictures of French and German. I guess that makes sense. But more and more we conceptualize language learning as not becoming a French person, but becoming a bilingual, so a merged or hybrid identity, so inhabiting some kind of a third space. So we really wanted then to show the notion of language learning as a process leading to bilingualism. We wanted to avoid the essentialism and national stereotypes that are in all these kinds of materials that we found. And we wanted to do all of this with a lot of kind of an iterative model of formative evaluation. We test on our students, we find out whether they like it, and we fix it. And the last point, collaboration with students is obviously key. They gave us a lot of the ideas for our materials. So the pedagogical innovations that I'm going to show you, we use a lot of non-native speakers, which is, I can't sell this to any commercial publisher, okay? And the reason is, I'll give you this anecdote. When we first published it, when it first went online, I was giving a talk about language acquisition theory at Cornell using these materials. And one professor said, I get what you're trying to say, Carl. I get it, second language acquisition, yes, but you know, it just sounds, when I listen to these students, it sounds like, this is a verbatim quote, that they're singing an aria off key. I thought that's a really interesting metaphor, that you are thinking of your students in terms of singing an aria. They have to be that good that there's, but the point is, it really hurt his ears, because teachers have an expectation for what pedagogical materials are supposed to look like and sound like. So we're using authentic language rather than scripted language for non-native speakers. That makes a huge difference. That opens up a can of worms. It moves us into orality. Most textbooks are based on a written norm. There are actual forms of language that never appear in writing that are only oral, and vice versa. So we end up having students speak like textbooks. That's a problem. We have bilingual models, so our native speakers, quote unquote, are actually multilingual, because that's what we want our students to be. Not monolingual French speakers. And we wanted to show that language learning is an process of identity construction. Okay, so let's go to the website, and I'll show you all these innovations really quickly. So Garen is now showing you the homepage for COERLL. We have materials in over 18 different languages. So I was mentioning Yoruba. We have Persian and Malayalam and indigenous Scandinavian. Not a big market for indigenous Scandinavian. And that's one of the reasons that the US government then is funding us to work on liftos to publish these kinds of materials. So here are materials in French. You scroll all the way down to the bottom and you come to Français interactif. And then we're calling this a community site because now it's been in operation for more than a decade. We have millions of users, and we finally have people who are contributing to the site in different ways. So there's a getting started page which tells you about the features of Français interactif. We have a teacher page, how to adopt demonstrations of teaching with it. They can upload scripts and lesson plans and so forth. But let me, and then the community, we also have a Facebook page where we have a moderator, but it does its own thing. We don't really oversee it that carefully. We're up to 20,000 likes, which is great, and it's a very active Facebook page. So let me take you to chapter 8 and just show you really quickly then these pedagogical innovations that I was talking about. So we'll start with La Maison. Each unit opens up with a video, and you will see, I hope.
C'est COERLL encore, et aujourd'hui nous sommes au centre-ville Lyon, that is right in the middle of downtown Lyon and Place Bellecour.
Okay, so let me stop for a second. So Kieran, was a member of, I was a director of the study abroad program in Lyon, France in 2001. She was a member of 30 students. They all lived with French families. She was, and then this is the chapter on la maison, your house. She takes you then on a little tour, but notice right away she's mixing languages. Okay, that's a taboo in the commercial publishing. They didn't like this idea, but I said, but that's actually what comes out of the mouth of an incipient bilingual. Children, when they're in bilingual environments, they mix languages. Okay, but the main point is that we were using our students as virtual tour guides, as teachers. Okay? I won't show you, there's a ton of content, but let me just go to the vocabulaire en contexte, le salon. Here we have, we are visiting one of the host family, and we have another student, Leila.
Présente ma mère d'accueil,
Okay.
Véronique Dennis.
So this to me is the entire story. This crystallizes everything, and I have not been able to sell this idea to commercial publishers. In the frame, we have both the non-native and the native, and that's what language learning is all about. We're trying to get them to communicate with the cultural other. And that's what we do. Madame Deleuze takes us on a tour of her house, so if you could get out of this. Yeah, and she takes, we go, it's totally unscripted, she just kind of makes it up as she goes along. But if we go to La Chambre de la Fille de Madame Deleuze, right there. So now we go near the end of the tour. She takes us to the bedroom of her daughter.
Et ici, c'est la chambre de ma fille qui a 18 ans et qui est très créative. Donc il y a des collages, il y a
Okay,
la
so she's saying now we are in
création.
my 18-year-old daughter's bedroom. She's very creative. Stop for a second. So just to let you know, I'm the camera person. I shot 50 hours of bad video. And I came back to Austin, and I had about 2 hours that I could actually use. No, not kidding. So I was standing in the doorway. She said collage, and I was trying to focus it on collage. Okay, can I play the rest?
Non, j'ai de voir.
Donc je vois, elle aime bien les hommes nus là.
Elle aime les hommes nus, mais elle aime aussi les peluches.
Okay, so what I said, I'm the camera person, and I see, finally when I focus, I see that so she's, the mother's saying, my daughter's very creative, she makes collages, she does this, she does that, and I say, I finally got it in focus, and I see that she likes naked men. Yes, she does like men. Madame Deleuze does not miss a beat. What does she say?
Des peluches encore. Des peluches. Des peluches. Ok, je vous montre une peluche. Voilà. Là, c'est toutes les peluches. Alors, on cache les hommes.
So, peluche means a teddy bear in French. She said, yes, she likes naked men, but she also likes teddy bears. She's 15 years old. As a mother, I can always take the teddy bears and hide the naked men. Okay, you cannot script this moment, which is the point. So in our materials, we have sentences that actually bring together very incongruous items, teddy bears and naked men. But the point is that language is always highly contextualized. Most pedagogical materials have always been highly decontextualized. And that's the problem that we are setting out to resolve with Français interactif. Okay, I'm going to turn it now over. I think I said enough, and let Garen talk about our newer materials. If there's time, I'll also show you the German materials because I hate to say it, but they're even better than the French. Okay. You want me to drive or you?
I'm all right. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of the new materials, but I also want to kind of focus in on some of the analytics that are behind these resources. And I do want to open this up and ask you all for your feedback on this, because what I'm also going to talk about is we're trying to figure out where we're going next. And so we're in the sort of last year of a grant funding cycle, and we're thinking about that next phase. But when I look at these numbers behind the resources, as Carl said, we have millions of users. Like, to how many people does that sound like, oh, that's amazing? Or am I really just thinking, oh, everyone has millions of users? Okay, so maybe it's actually somewhat legitimate that there are millions of users. Okay, that's good. Because what is striking to me is that it's not just that there's lots of visits. You hear numbers all the time about MIT OpenCourseWare may have 15 million visits in 2011, or the MOOCs have X hundreds of thousands of people that are seeing these things, right? We have a very large number, which is, you know, a significant portion of people spend less than 10 seconds on FI as a site. But we also have close to 130,000 people who spend more than 10 minutes on our site. So what that says to me, and at least what it says through the number of pages that these folks are viewing, is that they're actually engaging with that resource. They're learning something, and they're using it. So I get really excited about that, because as somebody who thinks about this as a product, as a book, as something that could be sold, let's say, but not necessarily sold, that's a football stadium full of people using that book. I think that's interesting. And so I think we want to think about that in our next phase of thinking, where do we go and how do we think about these resources? Because the data suggests that people are legitimately engaging with these resources. Deutsch and Blick is a newer resource. Carl may mention this, so there's a lot less traffic on it. I don't also know, maybe it's because people just don't want to learn German anymore. But what's interesting about the data here is that you see people using it in the context of the school year. So in the summer, it's relatively flat. But then, look, starting in September, you have this pretty interesting wave of usage. And you'll actually see something very similar to this in FI. It's actually pretty similar across the entire the year. But there's these peaks and valleys of students using it and then probably going and having fun and then using it again for homework. So what it suggests is that, yes, it's being implemented. People are using it. And as a new resource, this holds the potential for becoming even more adopted in places. We also have, so talking about other resources that we have, I get somewhat excited about the fact that we have resources that are considered the #2 download on iTunes for podcasts. Like, that's pretty I think that's kind of cool. Because, I mean, look, there's Chemistry 101 and then Tafalato, which is a Brazilian podcast done by Orlando Kelm. These data are from last year, I think, right? Or 2012. So whatever I think it was July to July. So what it's suggesting to me is that there are a significant number of people, at least in this niche area of foreign language acquisition and learning or teaching, that drill down into these resources, unlike just a peripheral, oh, I want to learn something and I'll do it for 15 minutes, or even less than that, 5 minutes. But I'll spend time with this resource. So I think it says something about the pedagogy of it, but also perhaps the fact that it might be working. We have a resource that we're actually, well, tell me when it was developed. I don't remember when teaching methods were actually started.
Yeah, 2002.
So, okay, so it is quite new. So this is also a resource where we're seeing a significant amount of growth in traffic. It's basically a resource that simulates a classroom, but it's based on classroom material, so it's not a course that you can take. But in our thinking right now is, there are a lot of foreign language teachers who write us saying, hey, I just found your course, or I just found this resource. How do I get credit? How do I get CPE, or even some sort of certification for taking all these, or basically going through the site? So hundreds of thousands of people have viewed it. I should actually say these data are all 6 months. This is just the past 6 months. So over the year, these actually increased quite a bit. But again, these engagement numbers, I think, are what are really, really important. Is that people who do spend time on the site are the ones driving the majority of the actual page views. So I kind of asked you, what do these numbers really mean? And does it mean that these resources are popular, or in some ways, like, is this just an average level of public interest, or are there opportunities here for us to go forward? And I think that as we talk about our final year, we're basically needing to figure this out. Do we start to focus in on these key audiences? So we've heard the sort of phrase of professional development being thrown around quite a bit. We have a really awesome resource for teachers who are seeking professional development experience through the teaching the foreign language methods site. Do we invest more time into creating a resource where we can provide them with CPE or credits? Or do we start focusing on some other parts? Because there are other pieces of this that we're trying to figure out as well. Modularity in resources, a variety of other different pieces as well. One thing we haven't talked about, but I think is somewhat interesting, and Carl might speak to this as well, is this question of how do we partner with organizations that are also under a similar sense of transition. The University Press obviously comes to mind, and a lot of institutions, but at UT especially, the question of what is their next role in all of this, and how could they help us, or how could we partner with them?
I should mention real quickly that I was starting out talking about commercial publishers, but they're university presses, and they have come and talked to us, those that deal heavily with languages. So I think there is actual interest in the publishing industry working with people in open education, making some kind of hybrid model.
So Robert Farrell and the group at OER, the Research Hub, earlier today we're talking about this notion of getting a large understanding of the evidence-based understanding of impact. And I think to some extent we're also really interested in trying to figure that out, comparing our resources to the other LRCs and NRCs and saying, hey look, ours are open and yours aren't, or maybe there's some sort of sense of hybrid. Does that demonstrate some more effective, or at least more of an outreach or more of an evidence-based approach to saying that these resources actually work?
So I wanted to say one anecdote, interrupt you for just a second. We as now a federally funded institution, we have to upload data twice a year in a server in the federal government. And the fields that we were filling out, like how many people use this, they weren't big enough for our numbers. So I'm sorry, but we need places for more zeros. And it was frankly because a lot of the other organizations were still kind of in print mode, where we had 50 people adopt our textbook and so forth. So we've kind of, I think the lens of open education has really dramatically changed our numbers, but also the way we're doing all of our practices.
Right, so as we think about next resources, some of the things we're doing, or you'll hear about it next hour from our colleague Rachel. We developed basically a video archive of videos that are basically demonstrating how Spanish is actually spoken in Texas. So there's the researchers and professors that shot the video and students kind of did these. They now assembled them, and there's an amazing amount of metadata behind it, allowing people to actually create lesson plans off of it and search the videos via their transcripts. So stick around for that talk. But this is an exciting thought about, hey, do we develop new materials to meet new markets, try out new techniques, or do we go back to these other things and say, how do we update FI? It's about 10 years old, but maybe there's a way to keep advancing that. Now, the other thing that I should say is that in terms of moving forward is we know that there's a strength in partnerships. So in this next phase of grant funding or cycling through that, we know that we want to partner with others. So if folks are interested in foreign language research, or at least understanding it, please get in touch. But one thing we're actually doing is partnering right now with the largest foreign language organization in the world. I think that's one of their claims. It's called ACTFL, and this just at the end of November we'll be in Orlando debuting a badge initiative. It's already launched, but what it is in large part is a way for us to get people talking to each other about interests that you would normally only find out either by knowing that person or by running into them in the hallway. So largely, it's a website where people can join what we're calling a convention network. You put your interests in it, you talk about where you're from, and then we get all this awesome metadata to say, hey, guess what? This person here in California has the same interest in this person in Maine. Maybe they can see each other, connect. And for doing that, they get a digital badge. So it's really not a badging initiative, but they wanted to do badges, so we figured we'd kind of do both activities there, because then we'll get a better understanding of what people actually want to learn about, rather than what this organization thinks people want to learn about during the conference. So that's a little bit about where we're going, but I don't know if there are other questions.
We have a couple minutes for questions.
Yeah.
About 3 more minutes. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
So at the very beginning of your talk, you said that publishers focus on what the teachers need, not the students. So are you claiming that what you're producing is focused, I mean, it is focused more on the students, but is it not focused on the teachers' needs as well? And if it is there a way to kind of merge the two, where you have it that focuses on both ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, well, obviously they have very different perspectives, but we just talk about users now. Yeah, I think you need to do formative evaluation of both groups, because teachers have to understand kind of the pedagogical premises of the materials. Students also have to understand those, but they're coming at it from different places. So I think the spin text, the spin text project, we worked carefully with both those groups because we were trying to get their EMIC categories, the categories that they understand this to be. So the short answer is you need both. You have to work with both. I was mainly saying that in my experience working with publishing companies, they didn't want to test my materials on students.
But with the French book, do you think that it meets all the needs of a traditional scope and sequence textbook?
Yes. Now, what we also did was, because I looked at lots of textbooks out there, we came up with traditional scope and sequence. So it has a pedagogical grammar, it has all those things. the other things that I thought were, for me, really important, we made sure that we included. So I think it has both. That's what I was saying. It's kind of mainstreamed in that it looks, teachers will pick it up and say, this looks like a textbook, I understand what to do. It's not disorienting to them, and that's very important. Again, the University of Texas is a nice laboratory because it's large, and if it works there with all the TAs and professors and different people teaching, it's going to work generally in a lot of different places. Okay. Thank you.